could be that we're talking about, loving kindness that takes a lot of reflection and paying attention to others and what their real needs are. Yeah, I think the point is that wisdom will bring a person to realizing that the most important thing is helping others, and gets their mind off themselves and onto others, onto God, onto other human beings, both. The Zohar talks about this idea that the righteous want to unify Kudsha Brichu and the Shechina. We want to unify the different, sphero together. Basically, they want to bring greater unity in God's revelatory lights, his revelatory portion. Again, it's kind of hard to say all these things, but the point is that they're doing something for God's sake. And I don't mean that in the foul language sense. They were doing it for the sake of heaven. They're not thinking they want to gain some spiritual high. They want to get some kind of enlightenment. But the true righteous, they're doing so that the Shekhinah should be uplifted, that the divine presence should radiate fully in the way it did at the time of the temple was standing. So they're thinking about God. It's just an incredible thing to think of prayer. What are we praying for? And someone's praying that that the temple should be built, that God should be happy. We want God, that they want God to be happy. It's really a level. And I think that's part of what he's saying here about wisdom. That wisdom is studying so much, that a person has such knowledge of God that it actually has such an effect on them that they truly, truly become altruistic in the most true sense.
May I try?
Yeah.
The way I kind of understand it or perceive it is that when an individual gets to the point of where they have nullified themselves or humbled themselves to such a point that their existence is nothing more than when someone encounters that individual, it's as if they were encountering God. To see that they're expressing loving kindness, mercy, tzedakah, all of these things are emanating from that person whose purpose is to be that emissary, if you will, of Hashem. So in a sense, this is when that person reaches that level of tzedakah and selflessness, they've achieved that level of wisdom.
So you're saying they both go together. So very good take. But the way I think about it is a little bit different, and I think they're both valid for sure. But I'll give an example this way. And again, it's unclear from his words, and I think he's really hinting to Kabbalistic things, and he's not really explaining himself very, very well, openly as to what exactly the meaning of this is. But to say in a more simple sense, wisdom has to do with the knowledge of God. I think that's what I mean. So how does knowledge of God lead you to true tzedakah? So the idea is, what I'm thinking is that when a person gets to a point where they really understand God's workings in the world, they realize that everything that God's doing is for the love of his creation and creatures, and he sees that even in his own life. And that's a tough thing to do, because despite the darkness and difficulties, but yet his examination of the mysteries of creation and God's interaction with the world brings him to understand that, and it really, really believes it like it's a reality. So then he also follows that. In other words, once he comes to realize that God is, such an incredible giver, and he looks at the first levels, again, is always, as we've spoken about so many times, he looks at creation and how much that God has brought to life, and so much vitality and sustaining all of the different creatures and things in the world, and just existence. You realize all existence, is all because God is doing it. And he comes to realize that God doesn't need anything, doesn't need anybody. He's not lonely. He doesn't need to be entertained. He just doesn't need any of this, you know? What do they have to go? And think about it. I mean, I have difficulty with this too. You know, sometimes teaching a student who's very young, it's very difficult. It gets boring. It's teaching them olive bays or something. It's hard to take. You know, and God is not bored with us, and he's involved in this creation for all this time. And after that, with all the other things having to do with creation that he's involved with. So what I'm saying is a person comes to really realize this and sees these things clearly and really focuses on all the good that God is doing, it affects him. And he becomes caught up in seeing what's the true reality of the world is all this loving kindness. That's what happened to Abraham. You know, he examined the creation and he came to realize this, that the whole world is full of loving kindness for free, altruistically, for not, Hashem doesn't get anything back from this. For most creatures have no idea. They don't, you know, and they don't say thank you. They don't make a blessing. They don't, and human beings forget about it. So, and yet Hashem sustains the world. So that's why it's interesting also that, and we can understand Rabbi Akiva now also so well, that when he heard the laughing in the Roman Colosseums, that all the other rabbis were crying, but he was laughing. You know, and famously, because if this is fulfilled, and you know, he said that if to the wicked that they have so much fun, so to speak, that obviously the righteous in the end will be much more. But I mean, even without that, the point is that look at all these people. They don't really know anything. They're not involved. They're kind of ungrateful. They're quite ungrateful, actually. You know, and they're having all these pleasures from the world, and God's good with it. It's fine. He keeps giving and giving and giving, and that this person sees this, and he realizes, you know, that it just by osmosis the person begins to follow, and also because he's so close to God, so he feels this richness and kind of a serenity inside, and he doesn't need, you know, to get from people. He's not focused on people giving him stuff and, you know, recognition or even attention. You know. Look, I mean, there are many levels of this because a person is a human being, and you know, it's people need companionship and et cetera. But point is that on different levels, different percentages, this is the way of the knowledge of God. It's one of the big aspects of it. Should bring a person to loving kindness to others. If it isn't, then there's something wrong. Then they're not. Then it isn't true, and it isn't internalized, and it's not. It's distorted. You know, if somebody sees God's actions and he sees someone angry or egotistical or something, then he's clearly doesn't get it. So he doesn't have the wisdom. Okay, so I think that's what it means, long story short, and wisdom has no other purpose than to accomplish tzedakah. The wisdom meaning the knowledge of God. Yeah, Hasidic works speak about this a lot, that the whole purpose of studying Hasidus is that a person should come to do good deeds for others and should come to action, come to greater levels in prayer, but there's a lot of focus on it should bring a person to do good to others. So, okay, next paragraph. What was the tzedakah that Noah practiced? He and his family fed and cared for all the animals, birds, and creatures aboard the ark. They worked around the clock with little or no sleep, caring for every species of creature on earth, great and small, right? Page 52. When Shem emerged from the ark, he reasoned that if God had wanted him to practice tzedakah with animals and birds, all the more so he should practice tzedakah with human beings. So he taught Torah to show people how to merit God's blessing in the new world. This was his tzedakah. It led him to establish the Academy of Shem and Eber, the first yeshiva in the world, the first school of any kind. Among Shem's illustrious students were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Job, Balaam, and countless scholars, judges, mystics, and prophets. Wow, huh? Shem taught the whole Torah to Abraham, including the mystical teachings of Sefer Raziel. He taught him the full depths and breadth of the 7 laws of Noah. According to the Talmud, Abraham studied 400 chapters of Torah law about idol worship. Most important of all, Shem taught Abraham the mitzvah of tzedakah. So, that's an interesting idea there, that Abraham studied 400 chapters on idolatry, and he was a Ben Noach. So it makes sense that there was once a class here so that I forgot his name. I forget again who was giving it. But there was someone giving a class on Maimonides' laws of idolatry. I don't know if he still is doing it. It was once upon a time a thing.
Rabbi, Balaam, he was taught the entire Torah by Shem?
It doesn't say that. He did go to the school. I don't know if he was taught the entire Torah. But he did some learning. He was OTD. You know what OTD stands for? Off the derech. You know what off the derech means?
Oh, yeah.
Off the path. So clearly Balaam was out there. I don't know if he got kicked out of the yeshiva or what. It's an interesting, we'd like to know what happened there.
But he was alive at the same time Shem was alive? They overlapped?
I don't know if this comes from a midrash. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, that would be a very long life. But then again, Balaam was a sorcerer and some type of prophet, and maybe he haven't had an unusually long life. I don't know, it needs further research. I'm not familiar with the midrash about that.
Okay.
Okay, but my point to you is just, even if you just, for the Bnei Noach to study the laws of idolatry, evidently there's 400 chapters somewhere on this. But even the Talmud on Avodah Zarah and idolatry is a lot to do there, a lot to study. I know a lot of it isn't so relevant nowadays, but okay. Next paragraph. Abraham was loving kindness clothed in a human body. He fed people, clothed them, and housed them, and set them up in business, and taught them to care for others. He was just nonstop giving. He brought thousands of people under the sheltering wings of the Shekhinah. He elevated them to the level of Gerim. And this too was considered tzedakah. Wow. Okay. So Abraham did so many different types of loving kindness in his life, all forms, until he got to the spiritual form of converting people. And like I said, it really is all goes together because he cared. He cared about other people. He wanted to see them on the right path. It bothered him to see them lost. He knew how important it was not to be lost, and he took the time to argue with them and so on and so forth. I don't know if I could do it. I mean, I know I don't do it. I can tell you that much. I don't. If I see people, I usually don't. I usually don't. I don't. It's not an easy thing to do. You have to have that personality, and the idea of debating with people. I guess that isn't it true though. I mean, facing facts isn't part of the reason I don't do it. Is I just don't want to exert the energy. I just don't want to exert the energy of arguing with people because the chance of success is low. And I just don't want to bother. You know, unfortunately, isn't that the bottom line? I don't know. Some people have a more, their nature is more persuasive in nature. They're debaters. You think I'm a lawyer, you think I'm a debater, but I'm really not so much. And particularly, but debating in law and such things, it's a little bit different because there are kind of rules. And it's a rational thing, and you're not trying to convince the person you're arguing with. You're trying to convince the third party who's objective, who's in the middle, and so you're trying to convince that person. Trying to convince someone who's set in their ways already. I mean, I don't know. I haven't found it to be I haven't seen a lot of success, but that's the thing. Abraham didn't care. He kept trying, and even people tell him, "Get out of here, you're crazy." He just kept going. I mean, he must have. How can you affect all these people and not approach people and approach and approach and approach? And it's like a life insurance salesman. People mostly slam the door in your face and you keep going, And that seems like Abraham did it. It's just really incredible. But I mean, in so many ways, it's so worth thinking about who Abraham really was for all of us to realize, what it means to be a giving person. But at the same time, he also seems like was very successful for himself. And that's another thing. How do you fit all that into a life? It's incredible. It even seems like actually his wealth came after he made all these students. First, he made the students before he reached the land of Israel. Once you reach the land of Israel, we don't see a lot of proselytizing and converting going on. And you could even say that the reason is exactly what I'm saying. He had a lot of prestige where he came from. Even though he was a rebel, but everybody knew him. He was a brand name, he came to a new country, a new people, and it's just, it just didn't work anymore, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't, he came to a new place, and we don't hear about this activity so much. We say that he made souls in Haran, but what about in Eretz Canaan? What about in Canaan? Why didn't he make souls there? So it does seem like, because that wasn't his hometown. He just didn't have that kind of influence anymore there. And so that's really, if you think about it, that's a big reason why it was a tremendous thing that he left. Because he was super successful. He was really well known there. He was a big name, even though a lot of people either loved him or hated him, but he was big. And he left all that. He went to a different country. Nobody really knew him. Nobody heard of him, cared, and then he became, respectable there too, but it seems like he wasn't the big influencer in Canaan that he was in Haran. Okay, anyway, let's see, where are we up to here? Where are we up to in this book here? Let's see. Actually, it's interesting. We started charity also in the laws of Noah, the righteous Gentile. Did we do so? Let's go to page 117. It's so interrelated to what we were talking about. Let's do a little bit. We have some more time. Paragraph 3. It is a general principle that a person does not become poor by giving charity. Nor does an evil, destructive thing occur through one's giving charity. Also, if one has mercy on others, the one above has mercy on him. So it's all the stuff we were discussing. Everything we were talking about is in here. Okay, so it's kind of this promise that a person will not be hurt by charity. And it's only going to bring good things and blessings into their life. Okay, paragraph 4. One is forbidden to tempt God, that is, to perform any action on the condition that God reveal his presence. Single exception to this is the act of giving charity. The Torah promises that God will repay anyone who gives charity, and a person is bidden to give in order to test God. If my memory holds correctly, what he said, that's forbidden to tempt God or say, God, I'm doing this and know that you do such and such, is actually for Israel, but for non-Jews, they're allowed to do that, if I'm not mistaken. So it's interesting he said this way in this book. Obviously, it's better to follow what he's saying. It's better not to perform something on a condition that you want a certain salvation. I think it says to give charity on the condition that a person's son or the child is saved from sickness, So it says you're not supposed to, well, no, for charity you can, but for other commandments you shouldn't. I think that non-Jews can be lenient in this, but if you want to be more careful, it's in the book here, he says to be careful, so better to be careful. Paragraph 5, God is close to poverty-stricken people, as it says, and the cry of the poor will he hear. Therefore, one has to be careful about the supplications of poor people. I mean, it's such a paradoxical thing, because it's a question the Greeks asked Rabbi Akiva. If your God loves the poor so much, then why doesn't he make them millionaires? Why are they poor then? And so it is a strange thing, like we're saying here. God loves the poor; he listens to their cries. But so why are they poor? Why are they poor? But yet there's no answer. It's, I guess, why they're poor is a secret, is the righteousness of God that we don't understand. The only thing we do know is, on the other hand, he's also compassionate, and he feels their pain, even though simultaneously, for whatever reason, they have to be in that state, for whatever reason, or it's for their betterment, or whatever it may be, but yet simultaneously he's not happy. Again, it's a story that, the metaphor of father, or parent in general, particularly a father, is such a good metaphor, because a lot of times, although modern fathers, you don't find this as much nowadays, but The father was a disciplinarian very often, sometimes in previous generations quite harsh. But the purpose was to straighten the kid out. I mean, that's how it was seen. To make sure that the children are strong, that they're disciplined, that they behave as they should, they act like adults, etc. They're responsible. And that was more important. So with a real, true loving father that wasn't just letting out steam, but someone who really loved the child, that was a difficult thing to do. To see the child suffer, but yet do it because the father felt it had to be done. And that's a similar thing basically to the poor. For some reason that we don't know beyond our understanding, hidden thing that some reason they have to be in that state, we don't understand it. But yet simultaneously God has compassion on them. So it's complex. Okay, paragraph 6. Every person has the obligation to give charity according to his ability. Even a poor person who supports himself from charity may give charity from these funds. Though he can afford only little, this should not prevent him from giving charity. A little charity from a poor man is considered as worthy as a great amount by a rich person. As the sages say, when one offers a sacrifice, it does not matter if the offering is an ox or a bird or a flower, whether it is a large offering or a small offering. The main criterion is that the giver directs his heart to his Father in heaven. So in regards to offerings, there's a lot of different kinds of offering. A person can give a big bull, a person can give a calf, or they can give a goat. I mean, there's different type of offerings. There's certain sacrifices that actually are what's the word for it? There's multiple options depending on a person's financial situation. They can bring, the meat, the big cattle offering, or bird, or even flour. It goes down levels. And it's saying that in the eyes of God, it's equal. If the person is poor, can only bring flour, it's good enough in the eyes of God. That's the best they can do. But if one has only enough for his sustenance, he has no obligation to give charity. A person has a priority providing for himself before he provides for others. The question is, what is sustenance? What is sustenance? What sustenance is today and what sustenance was hundreds of years ago was a very different thing. Sustenance meant food for today, maybe kindling in the wintertime, that was about it. That was sustenance. Now sustenance is, internet, electricity, heating, clothes, car, mortgage payments, right? Or is it? Or is it not? The simple view is that's how we live today, and a person would be rejected from society without those things, and therefore it's part of his sustenance. I don't know, but there has to be a line drawn somewhere. The person is always the next level. I have to get new suits. I have to do this. I have to do that. And the person doesn't give me any charity. So there has to be a limit. And a person should not put themselves in a situation where their spending for their needs is more than their income, or covers only their income, and that they have no money for charity. They should try to arrange things in a way that there's money left over. That's just a smart thing in general. A person shouldn't spend every last penny that comes out of their paychecks or whatever it is. And that's pretty tough today, but nevertheless, that's the way it should be done. Okay, a little more time. Paragraph 7, the community should supply every need that a poor person lacks. People of the city are obligated to supply him whatever he is lacking to maintain the level he was accustomed to before he became poor. They should give it to him discreetly so that few know he is receiving it. Now that's interesting. It's interesting and well known, but hard to understand. In other words, a person who lived their whole life poor and just had the basics, food, clothing, shelter, one set of clothing, bread, soup, in a small hut, and now he doesn't have the money for those things, we have to give him for that. On the other hand, somebody was very wealthy, was riding in a golden carriage, and was eating dainty little delights. Basically, the halacha says we have to provide that for him, which is an incredible thing to say. my question also is, what if we only don't have the funds for it? I mean, how many communities have the funds to hold up on someone's lifestyle like that? It's kind of crazy. I've never heard of a situation where in this day and age that's actually done. If someone, makes some bad business deals or whatever it is and loses their fortune, I don't think that's done. What I have heard though is in the community is that people can't make mortgage payments and things like that. That there are organizations that try to help out, or people make campaigns. So that's an example of this idea that person shouldn't lose their house. You could argue that people don't have a house. A lot of people are renting. In our community too, there's a lot of people renting. They can't afford a house, right? So, but we don't say that because the person has that level of lifestyle that they should go homeless and lose their home. We try to help them. So, but this is quite surprising. Simply because, as I said, because it costs a lot of money and there are a lot of people in need. But obviously it's hypothetical. It's ideal. If we have enough money, we can do it. If we don't have the money, don't have the money, But it was well known that throughout Jewish history and exile, in European communities and in Arabian communities, that the Jewish community had their own, social services funds, even at times when in the Gentile cultures, they didn't have such things. I don't know about the Muslims, if they had any of that or not. They talked about it. I don't know. And obviously some monks in some churches did do some of that, but it wasn't as widespread as far as I understand. As far as making sure that every village and every place had charity and so on, they took care of their poor, was definitely not something that was in medieval Europe or through the 19th century that existed. Some people just starved. They didn't have. So, or people people had to go into prostitution or other things like that. Nebuch, unfortunately, should know from it because they were starving. They didn't have how to make a living and nobody would help them. So the Jewish communities didn't have that type of situation, generally speaking. That's what we hope. There's all kinds of, I didn't live at the time, but I do know that every community is obligated to create a charity. There were probably times when even that wasn't enough, and there were probably villages that were poor and they didn't have enough money to help everybody. But nevertheless, every village had one. Every town had a charitable organization set up, usually connected with the synagogue or through the city council, the Jewish city council. The Jews had their own organization. Okay. 8, if a poor person is collecting from door to door publicly, one should give him a small donation according to the poor man's situation. Okay, I guess that means you shouldn't send them away. I don't know. I'd like to mention that traditionally this mitzvah was particularly a woman's mitzvah, being that the men were out of the house working and the women were at home. And this was very common that the poor would knock on doors asking for things and asking for food. And, women would give them food, soup, bread, whatever they could afford, depending on the situation. And I could tell you a story from my own history that in my own family, that my grandmother, my mother's mother, told us the story that they were so poor like that, and that they had to, after the First World War in Poland, that they had to knock on doors Friday night to get some soup. So this was a real situation, and that women played a very big role in charity, in back in those days when people were not afraid to open doors. Okay.
Rabbi,
yes.
We don't, at least in our area, we don't see people going door to door, knocking on doors asking for money. Would the equivalent in our community today be the person standing at the intersection with a sign that's very public? Would that fall under this category?
Yeah, it would. The problem is today that a lot of people need different kind of help, though, that are asking for that kind of help, that are standing on corners. But yeah, the best is to give them, look, you have to really judge on a case-by-case basis. Are you obligated to give to somebody who's clearly, let's say, a drug addict or a drunk or something? I don't know the answer. I really am not sure. I think the best thing is to give them a very small amount. So that way you are giving charity. We're not giving too much that they're going to buy a gigantic bottle of liquor 5 minutes later, and that's where your money went. You know, the best thing in those situations is to give them food, give them something that they're not going to spend on their addiction immediately. Because unfortunately, a lot of the time that's what the case is, and you're not really helping. So again, it comes down to, do we have the time? Are we putting in the thought? Are we, and that's why, but it's a wonderful thing in our society that there are a lot of jobs that are geared, and professions that are geared to helping people and helping people like this. And so a way really, again, this is all about, are we putting in the effort? Are we doing, what we need to do is to get involved in terms of the issues and be vocal within government, maybe in terms of public services. And if these people are not getting the help, how can we help? Or calling public services. There was a time when I think I saw somebody strewn out on the sidewalk, and again, next to my work, maybe that same block or a block away. I think it was the same block years ago. And I called 311, which is the New York information line, and they put me in touch with EMS and the police department. They did come, but the person declined help. It's just a terrible situation, and a lot of them say that going into shelter, New York is not Texas, and I don't know what's going on in Texas or any of these other nice places where you guys live. But I do know that in New York City, they don't even want to go to the shelters because people get abused there. So, the point is to really help a lot of the people you're talking about, Sandy, needs a lot of involvement, and maybe voting for candidates, making it an issue, a political issue that's discussed, social issue that's discussed, dealing with the population who are addicted in the streets, mental illness. And what are we doing for these people? And it's both an issue for their safety and our safety. So that's as far as that. The best thing is to give to organizations who you trust are doing a good job. That are really the money. That's my opinion. That's the best, because you give to people. I remember in 770 in Crown Heights, there were people go around and they're drug addicts. And if you don't give them, oy vavoy, are you in trouble? Yelling at you, and it's terrible. Not all of them. Not all of them. There was a guy I used to know. I used to give him some money, and he would tell me all kinds of stories. My aunt I need money to go to Chicago because my aunt just died. I have to help my nephew, my cousins, and that total nonsense. It was going for drugs. So you have to be careful, because first of all, where's your money going to? Second of all, you're helping people just promote their addictions. It's really just a waste. It comes from a good place in the heart, but that has to do with what's the mixture of judgment with loving kindness. Wow. Wanted to see what Ross sent a message that I think is maybe quite interesting. He says, my grandmother had to make clothing from a flour sack for my mother. They worked on a farm. She was born at the time of the Great Depression. Yeah. Wow. It's so important to tell these stories, I think, because it helps people put their lives into perspective and makes people realize how much suffering there could be. And I think it makes us humble. Less spoiled. I think less spoiled and more ready to handle the difficulties of life, to know how things were difficult for our parents, grandparents. Okay, so that's as far as that goes. So there's this idea of fortunate is the man, happy is the man that he thinks into the needs of the poor, to paraphrase the verse in Psalms that discusses that chapter. And so the point is to really think about what the person's needs are. Sometimes giving him the money is not really his needs because it's against what he thinks he needs it, but it's not good for him. But as I said, the problem is, are we professionals? You see somebody on the street and he just feels so terrible. Look where his state in life, filthy and smelling like, liquor, and it's terrible. But what can I do? I don't know what to do. And usually they'll just take advantage. They'll tell you a story. They'll want to, want money from you and this and that. And you give them your phone number and forget it. So how can they? So you really have to know what you're doing. That's why the best thing is to try to get professionals involved. Unfortunately, usually when you do that, they leave. They don't want the help. It's very bad. And that's why, again, what does it come back to again? Upbringing and the parents and education and everything around them. I mean, they say people have addictive tendencies, but do they have to be addicts? I mean, is that really the case? Are we saying that it's nothing the parents could have done? It's nothing that their surroundings could have done? I highly doubt it. I think a lot of these people, they, we're in social settings where there was a lot of drinking, and they have addictive personalities, and then they got stuck. They got pulled into it. They didn't have much discipline in their lives. They didn't have much direction in their lives. They feel terrible about themselves for various reasons. So that's why it's really one of the biggest points about Judaism is that the idea is we have to start it from the ground up. We're trying to solve problems on the macro level. Hey, let's throw a lot of money at all these millions of people that are dysfunctional. We see where it goes. It's a bottomless pit. The problems aren't solved. And we're just spending and spending and spending, and it's just getting worse. So what's the answer? I thought we were supposed to be loving kindness. So that's why, it's like we said with Abraham, the first loving kindness, and Shem, the first loving kindness is education, is nurturing parents to children, etc., etc. And I'd say the same thing about this community to all, how many people we have here today? To all of us here today is that the more we can affect young people who have a chance to set their lives in a certain direction towards being a Ben Noach, that's really, so important. So everybody here seems like there no kids in this group at the moment. Hope that doesn't insult anybody. But yeah, it's key. I mean, it's the same in the Jewish community. It's so wonderful to have people, someone who is not committed to put on tefillin or to come to the synagogue. But let's face it, if they had their kids already and the guy person's 50 years old, you can help them, but all those future generations, it's already done. So if they sent their children to public school and all the rest of it, it's done with already. That's why it's so important to have. Same thing. My dream would be that somehow the Ben Noach community would be, young couples that somehow that we get, the young people and kids and stuff like that, and it needs a school. That was a Jewish way. When the Haredi and Hasidim came to the United States, they built schools. Famously, the Satmar Rabbi, he said that I see that the American Jews, they build big synagogues and small schools, or they don't build schools. He said, I'm going to build big schools and little synagogues. So that's the key, because you indoctrinate, you teach the kids in the school, and they become, their identities develop by the time they're 18 or 20, and that's it. And then you really want to make sure that you lock it in, you get them married. Boom, that's it. That's the story over. So anyway, so there's another note from Keith Peiser. I remember also when I was once visiting Crown Heights, I saw a lot of charity. Yes, I did give someone charity because they said they needed it. I realized, though, when giving charity, you have to be cautious because you don't always know if it's safe or not. However, it's hard to see them, to see what they're going through. And you'll never understand them fully, so still feel for them by a certain need of a call to action. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying, though. See, but the question is, when we give to these people, to such people, is it truly giving for them, or is it because we feel this feeling of compassion and we just can't help, we can't take seeing them and not giving something, and because they'll be angry at us if we don't give, and we don't like that feeling, so we just give it to them here, or even though here it makes us feel good with giving, then we feel pity. It's a feeling of pity. We feel pity for them, so we're responding to our feelings of pity. But what if those feelings of pity are misplaced? Or, you know, like I said, the best thing is give somebody an apple who seems like they're addicted, who's on the street or something like that. It's very hard. Look, I actually heard of some people in Crown Heights, speaking of Crown Heights, who house some people like this. I mean, these are really strong people who can deal with dysfunction, and they stay normal. I mean, you have to be a strong person, have good boundaries, you know, and I don't know. I don't know if it's in the person's house or it's a next door building. Maybe it's a next door thing. I don't know. But I've heard there is a case, at least one case like that I heard about in Crown Heights. Okay, so my point is really thinking about how we can help other people. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes we just have, you know, like again, in New York on the subway, sometimes people will come up to me or they make these announcements, I lost my job, and this and that. You know, usually when you say to them, hey, can I send you a referral for a job? They're not interested. So the story is a scam, and they're usually addicted or something. And, you know, it's a usual case. Sometimes there are exceptions. But anyway, any comments or questions on anything we've learned tonight as we begin to wrap up?